What is up, guys?
Welcome back, episode 17 of Two Commoners Podcast. We're back again with another abstract episode. We're going to talk about a pretty complex topic here about why we think the country is shifting more left than it is right. We're going to mention the Overton window and explain what that is, and hopefully shed some light on a complex topic. So let's try
Shit some light on the topic.
on a complex topic. Yeah. Does that make sense? I don't know. Moving on. Sid, explain what the Overton window
The
is.
Overton window is a rectangle on our political spectrum. So
Kind of
imagine.
like a window. Rectangle.
Indeed. So imagine our political spectrum. It is a straight line, like this one. On one side, you got the right. On the other side, you got the left. We all know what both sides are about. And then, over the line, you got, let's pretend this is a rectangle that can slide or grow and shift across the spectrum. And that rectangle represents what is a mainstream idea.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, although the Overton window usually applies to politics, you could even apply it to anything like a music genre or a TV show genre on showing what is mainstream and like acceptable and not out there.
Yeah.
Because there'll always be groups that like all things. The Overton window more so just represents what if you went out into like if you wanted to be taken seriously with a political opinion, kind of going on like mainstream news or in any sort of mainstream outlets, and you wanted your ideas to be more to resonate and be more acceptable throughout the masses, that you'd want to be within the Overton window.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, throughout history, there's always been people trying to push the Overton window one direction or the other, depending on where they think it is. But guess what? There is a trend that goes throughout the entire universe of planet Earth. And that trend is to the left.
Yep.
And before capitalism, we had serfdom. And before that, we had like monarchy.
Yep.
And you could claim that with each iteration, the system moves farther to the left. But why does it move farther to the left? Well, you know the difference between like conservatism and liberalism on kind of like a basic level, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like conservatism just kind of means maintaining the system we have, kind of like keeping. Sometimes it means stepping back. In fact, what Americans call conservatism, or what any country calls conservatism, isn't even accurate to what the actual definition is, which is so conservatism definition is a little different depending on what you're trying to conserve, because sometimes what you're trying to conserve could be what's in place right now, or it could be what was in place a few iterations of policy ago. Or for more radical right people, it's what was in place hundreds of years ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So staying in the same place or moving backwards on policy is essentially like a right-winged way of thinking, which is why things normally tend to trend left, because at the end of the day, we do make changes.
Yeah, we want change.
Yeah. And I think
now it seems more drastic change than ever.
For sure. And I mean, the question is the rate changing or is just the end goal changing?
Yeah, given the system, I don't think the rate will ever change. I think it'll always be.
I think the rate is changing a little bit.
Think?
I mean, maybe not in how it. So the Overton window doesn't necessarily represent what policies are in place.
Yeah.
It represents what policies are palatable and
Yeah.
mainstream amongst the people. So the rate in which the Overton window can shift quicker to the left this decade than it did the previous decade, without there actually being a change in the rate of policy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Did you have anything you wanted to add about the window shifting to the left? Why you think that is?
Well, I mean, it makes sense given like over the centuries that the country has been around,
Yeah.
that we've always shifted left. But
Well, this applies to the world too.
yeah,
in general.
the world too. But as to why it is, it's hard to put a finger on it because I feel like it's a nurture aspect that each generation takes on different experiences and sheds those experiences and shares those experiences differently with the next generation. Like baby boomers, for example, share their more right ideologies, in my opinion, with with our parents.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that given that our youth nowadays has a much bigger voice, given that we have social media and online platforms that allow us to share our views more openly and freely, that I feel like the youth has much more left views than any other generation has ever had. But does that mean it's changing faster and we're going more left faster? I don't know. But I do think it gives a good reason as to why we are moving more left. And also millennials too. I do think.
Well, I think you could even make an argument to say that millennials are more, at the very least, millennials are more what you might call like very culturally liberal, and I think maybe even more so than Gen Z.
Yeah.
Well, it really depends. Like, you know me, I'm kind of the type of person who, um, I really like free speech. I don't like to watch what I say. I like to kind of be edgy sometimes,
Yep.
and I like to kind of not hold that against people because I like to separate people's non-serious side from their serious side.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the culture of political correctness has deemed that all of it's serious and we have to be taking it seriously all the time,
Yeah.
and therefore we have to police speech, thought, and regard them as actions more like readily so.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm not a huge fan of that, and a lot of it has to do with kind of my taste in comedy and media. But the thing is I am way more like politically correct than my dad is.
Yeah.
Like by far. Like he says stuff that I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
And usually it's not just because he said it, because I know it's because.
And I've off of that. Sorry.
Yeah,
I've
go
noticed
ahead.
that too. Like with my parents and their parents.
Yeah.
Like it has gotten a lot mellower.
Well, it's also like, have you ever noticed when older people say stuff like that, it's usually like not always a joke.
Yeah.
Like usually when I'm saying something edgy, it's it's usually a joke.
Yeah.
Like even if someone got a soundbite of me saying something that's like not very good, I'm sure in the context in which I was saying it around my friends being people who I can kind of just be free around and they know
Yeah.
I'm joking and they know what I'm about, that's a joke. I don't be that way around other people because I know context and setting matters. You're in a different setting. You have to kind of be a little bit of a different person and be more accessible because what you say matters to people who are taking you more seriously. You're in a serious setting, you got to be more serious. You're in a less serious setting, you can be a little more loose and kind of go into your joke ironic personality. But parents and older people and people of the Gen X generation and boomer, I guess, a lot of them don't even really have the that like difference between like how they are, like when they say stuff like that, that's like how they are.
Yeah.
Like they don't have, like, I feel like meme culture has allowed us to make this separation pretty easily
Yeah.
because memes are like pretty nonsensical humor most of the time, pretty out there stuff. If we didn't have the context, we wouldn't find it funny. It's pretty easy to compartmentalize like my humor into the meme version of me when
Yeah.
I'm like joking around memeing, and when I'm trying to be serious.
Yeah.
And I feel like the older generations don't do that. It's all one person. So they say something like that, and it doesn't feel like a joke, even if they might say it does. But half the time, I don't think it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They lost a certain level of well, I guess they didn't lose it. They never had a certain level of sarcasm that this generation has.
It's not even just sarcasm. It's almost like awareness because I feel like the through the internet and everything else that we have access to, we're able to basically get into any perspective and group that we want to get into really easily. You used to only be able to gravitate to people near you.
Yeah.
So like culture would be confined to the proximity of who's around you
Yeah.
and what groups are around you.
It also allows you to be more honest too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like now that you no longer, so like that's why like for a while a lot of like certain music genres would be confined to racial groups and cultural groups because there was no internet and fandoms would, you kind of get what I'm saying, right? That's why like for a while like an African American kid growing up in the inner cities, it'd be less likely that he'd be into metal. He'd probably more likely be into hip hop. So certain things become more of a black cultural things, and certain things become more of a white cultural things. It doesn't even need to be defined by race. It can be more of a north-south, a west-east thing.
Yeah.
But now I can go and be in communities on the internet that like this thing no matter where I am.
Yeah.
So then I'm around that people all the time, socializing with them. And this is also why the internet allows more radical ideas outside of the Overton window, because usually those people would talk to other people and they would feel like an outcast and they wouldn't make it very far spreading their ideas and they'd probably just keep it to themselves. Now they can talk to other people that have similar ideas with them and the ideas can travel faster because the ideas are no longer bound to the proximity in which they inhabit.
Yeah.
You kind of get what I mean?
Bunch of almost growing more cliquey as a society.
But it's like weird because you grow. You might want to. I don't necessarily know if it's more cliquey. It's like it depends how you use that power I just described. Because if you use it to sit in an echo chamber, then you're probably growing more cliquey. But it also gives you the ability, since you're anonymous and you're allowed to inhabit several spaces at once, even if they might conflict with one another, which I often do on politics when I'm watching people on the left and watching people on the right. If like I was trying to hang out with those people and talk to them in real life, no doubt I would not be allowed in some of those groups.
Yeah.
But like I'm on the internet, I'm anonymous, I can do whatever I want. Some people choose to sit in echo chambers, some people tend to go everywhere, but this allows you to absorb so many perspectives and spread your perspective, and you're not confined by walls. So when parents make comments that might seem and older people make comments that might seem a little out of touch and a little like, I guess you could say yikes, and less politically correct.
Yeah.
It's mostly because they're not aware of like the other cultures that would view it differently and why.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? They were only around their culture and their proximity, and most of the people in that generation still don't use the internet like you or me do. So they continue to not get that information and that perspective. What's awesome is you can be pretty worldly for just sitting in your basement nowadays. You can know a lot of stuff about the world just because the whole world's talking to you through your phone.
Yep.
Obviously, that's no substitute for a real world experience, but it's something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to see how much technology has just really changed not only the social and cultural landscape of this country, but politically too. I mean, we have generations past that have, I don't know, kind of held their views to themselves in a way, and not necessarily expressed their views openly unless they like really were comfortable with the people around them. Nowadays, you have this technology where you say you remain anonymous and you can spread these views, whether it be hateful, far right, far left views, or even just centrist, moderate views. It gives you that sort of groupthink aspect of it.
And that's another thing.
It creates a more polarizing
Yeah.
country. This technology, which may seem beneficial, allows you to communicate all over the world, but in the end, what's the main? What's it accomplishing? Not very much.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, so I wouldn't say technology isn't necessarily accomplishing nothing, because what it gives us the ability to spread these ideas without there being borders for the ideas, which can be very valuable. But
Yeah.
the reason there is such I think there needs to be a sense of accountability that is taught to people on how they use the internet and how they police themselves in diversifying what communities they go into and kind of keeping themselves in line so they can check to see whether or not they're in a community that might be problematic. And even if there is a problematic community, since you are not actually attached to it, since you're just basically a spectator that can go in and out of the walls, you can even view problematic communities and still not be problematic yourself.
Yeah, and
You
that's
go
the
to
thing too. Like it's not going to become any harder to get into those problematic communities.
But that's the thing. You just got to be somebody who basically doesn't drink all the Kool-Aid. Like here's the thing. I can watch like a Nick Fuentes video and realize he's kind of a dirtbag and that he has some radical right views and is a member of the alt-right and still like watch some out of curiosity to wonder what that crowd thinks and what some of the logic behind it is and what their talking points are.
Yeah.
I don't need to watch it all the time, which is why I don't. But it's almost nice to like see stuff like that, so since that's a community that's growing and in the world, it's nice to be able to just walk through the wall and see what they're talking about.
It's interesting that you said it's growing.
I think both of the communities are growing, although I would argue that I think the alt-right is growing at a slower rate than the left-wing communities. However, they try to say that it's different, that that's not the case. However, they also conflate the rise between viewership of the Daily Wire, which has gotten extremely popular over the past couple of years, which is more of a rise of what I would call mainstream conservatism,
Yeah.
and they try to conflate that with alt-right. They talk about an alt-right pipeline, which is an interesting theory. I just don't think I buy into it.
What is it?
The alt-right pipeline is basically if you are making ideas that would make you more So let's say I'm Ben Shapiro, and I'm not saying explicitly alt-right ideas. However, I am saying ideas that are more right of center and a little more farther right of center than some people are uncomfortable or comfortable with, hence why he's a controversial figure.
Yeah.
Because he peddles a type of conservatism which arguably it would be more acceptable by somebody who's on the alt-right than somebody who's like far liberal. That would mean that if you're in the center and you start to agree with what Ben Shapiro is saying, then in theory you would be more susceptible to believing views by the alt-right. So like you would watch Ben Shapiro before watching an alt-right video. Before an alt-right video you wouldn't respond too well, but after watching a Ben Shapiro video, now your window, your personal indicator on the spectrum, has slid farther to the right. So now things farther to the right are closer to you relative to where you are now, and therefore it's easier to get there now. But the reason I don't like this is because this can easily be flipped. However, if I flip it around on the left, I'm sure members of the left would say something like, but the far left's good and the far right's bad. Which my response would be, I don't like either, although I would probably agree that I would probably rather live in a far left utopia than a far right utopia. But I'd still prefer somewhere in the center.
Yeah.
Somewhere. Probably a little bit more left, maybe a little bit more right, depending on how it was done. Problem is all these political theories in practice and how they work in theory differ. So that's why it's even hard to indicate where I'm at. All I know is I think extremities will all go one direction in the future. I think extremities will always be abused.
Yeah.
Because the people on more extreme ends of the spectrum typically have followers who are way more passionate and way more likely to reach into the toolbox and pull out the tool of violence, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that's the alt-right pipeline. Do you think do you get where they're coming from? What do you think about that?
I understand where they're coming from, but we are three free thinking individuals that have an opportunity to prevent that easily. And I think having the ability to be exposed to information that like like a moderate conservative wouldn't really agree with helps have some resistance. And
Yeah.
it doesn't.
Well, couldn't you always say it works the other way too? That's what I never understand about their argument.
Yeah,
Ben Shapiro could just as easily pull somebody out of the alt-right to more moderate conservatism.
Yeah. I could. It's pulled me in some ways, too.
I just.
And that's where it's good. That's where technology and social media does benefit the political landscape. That it makes people more well-rounded individuals, but also, ironically, more polarized too.
What's really interesting about this is we had What's really interesting about this is we had mentioned that what was I gonna say?
You're good. It just pops up.
Okay. Some funky things happening on the computer over here. My Pornhub browser's popped up.
Jesus Christ! No,
that's a joke, guys.
That's a joke.
Okay, now that was a solid laugh riot derailing it.
Yep.
No, but what I was saying is, you know how you said that the internet might not necessarily be good, might not be bad because it puts us into these echo chambers and makes radical communities find other people in those communities, and then those people can talk. That's obviously not a very good thing that occurs. Mm-hmm. But what I would like to point out is the alt-right pipeline is basically them arguing that that's occurring, that you get pulled into a community slowly but surely, and then you're stuck in that community and you're around people who believe a thing that's way out of the Overton window, but you think it's okay because you're now around people there. So from your perspective, your Overton window seems like all those people are there.
Yeah.
But if you keep yourself from staying in one echo chamber where it's all one people having the same standard of what's in the Overton window, your view is going to be large and it's going to be impossible to get radicalized. So I think it's literally about teaching accountability and responsibility of people not getting pulled into that. And I think that's not talked about as much because people will be like, Facebook and Twitter and YouTube need to regulate what shows up on their platforms.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say.
Is it something you want to talk about that specifically?
Well, like you get these platforms, specifically YouTube, that caters to what you like to watch, like whatever pops up on your recommended. For example, Facebook does kind of the same thing. But what I was trying to get at is that prevents and kind of, in some ways, is a lighter form of censors. I'm talking politically speaking, censors those other views that may prevent you from getting pulled in by those radicals.
I get what you're saying, but do you know how I started watching Kyle Kalinske?
Yeah.
It was from YouTube recommendations. I would always watch Ben Shapiro, and I'd watch Joe Rogan.
Really?
And I'd watch other things. And so basically, what I'd run into is I was in the Joe Rogan and Ben Shapiro at the same time, and I'd get recommendations for like Ben Shapiro on Joe Rogan, Ben Shapiro's show, Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan, a lot of stuff that people would say like typical right-wing stuff. I even used to watch a lot of the Rubin Report, which it's kind of funny. I don't really like that anymore. Yeah. But point being is all these people had kind of like interacted with one another. Ben Shapiro went on the Rubin Report at one point, so did Jordan Peterson. All those people all went on Joe Rogan. Then Joe Rogan had Kyle Kalinske on. Kyle Kalinske talks about the same topics as Ben Shapiro. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Ben Shapiro debates Cenk Uygur of Young Turks from Politicon. Cenk Uygur debates Tucker Carlson. You start to get this web of Crystal Ball on the Hill show Rising, who's like left-leaning, talked about had a segment where she responded to one of Tucker Carlson's segments. When you have content specifically like that mentions other names, it's really easy to have your recommended jump you from left to right, just like that.
Yeah.
And it did happen to me. The only way that wouldn't happen is if you went out of your way to avoid all those recommendations and clicked the thing that said, I don't want to see this, which I'm sure plenty of people do. They see something that's outside of what they want to see for politics, so they don't watch it. And then it starts to go away. But I'm almost positive I'm pretty positive that at some point or juncture, just about everybody gets recommended when they're into politics because of how intertwined politics is on YouTube. They'll get recommended at least one thing that typically goes against what they're talking about. And I watched one Kyle Kalinske video once, and I was getting them recommended all the time, bro.
Well,
all it takes is one.
That's good.
And then it started infecting my mostly conservative stuff. Now if you look at my YouTube feed, you get everything from socialists to conservatives to like non-political stuff. Like, I don't know,
It's good that happens then.
I'm just glad the way it's set up, personally.
Yeah, I'm not a big YouTube user, so I guess I never really experienced that. But
it does take a while though.
Yeah.
You stay in that solid like I stayed on that like solid circle of conservative like platforms for like a solid couple months before it started recommending me other things.
Yeah.
But it also didn't take me to the alt-right like people claimed it did.
Yeah.
In fact, it did recommend me some Nick Fuentes videos at one point, but they were actually re-uploads because his real channel's down.
Mm-hmm.
And that was after I was already... fun fact, he showed up in my recommendations after I watched left-wing videos that were talking about their view of the alt-right.
Yeah.
So isn't it funny how that, like, opened up the gateway to that?
That is weird.
Yeah, so when people act like it's an endless abyss into one side on YouTube, it's really not. It's about personal accountability. The recommendation pushes you in a direction, but it also knows that chances are you want to watch those things. Mm-hmm. You still got to have accountability on what you watch. I think a lot of people don't seem to realize that. It's not like in the olden days where you only have a couple channels and like what you consume from the news is basically on the news because there's only like 4 news channels.
Yep.
Now it's like anyone who gets their news off YouTube, which I kind of do, you can basically get whatever angle you want. It's completely up to you.
Yep.
And you can get all of it if you want. You can only get some of it. I think some people should be more responsible with that. How do you get your news?
How do I get my news? Twitter. Well, I get it. I won't say that. I get articles that pop up in my recommended for you, and then.
So it's like Twitter from news.
And then what's trending? And then.
So it's Twitter giving you articles from other news sites, basically. I used to do that with Reddit.
Yep. I get articles from New York Times, Fox News. I actually had a Breitbart one pop up the other day.
It's been a while since I've read any Breitbart.
Yeah. I didn't know Tucker Carlson owned Daily Wire.
He doesn't.
Or majority of it, didn't he?
Tucker Carlson?
Yeah.
I didn't think he was involved in Daily Wire.
I thought he was.
From what I understand, there's 2 co-owners of Daily Wire, and it's Ben Shapiro and Michael Knowles. We're all like pulling out our phones.
Yeah.
We're just talking about how unuseful the internet is and how it radicalizes people, and we're like whipping out phones.
Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. He owns something.
Get the truth.
Is that Big Bad Ben? Yep.
Can you?
Matt Walsh.
Matt Walsh is the worst one.
I can't see him.
Can you name all their names?
I don't know those 2. I've seen this guy. This guy shows up on Fox News all the time.
Yeah, he's been making the rounds of it lately. That guy is Michael Knowles, and the bald guy is Andrew Klavan.
Oh, I don't know.
And fun fact, it's actually an even split between. It's actually an even split in between Jewish people and Christian people who run the podcast on these networks. 'Cause
Really?
Ben and Andrew Clavin are both Jewish, and Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles are both Catholic.
Kind of cool.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Well, imagine if they got somebody who was Islamic. It would be a little weird.
Yeah.
I don't think it would quite work.
All right, should we wrap her up?
Yeah, I think we made some solid points about.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening to episode 17. We'll see you next week with another more
Should
more
we
political.
should we give them a sneak peek on what next week's episode is?
Yeah, you give them the sneak peek. I think you got some up your sleeve.
Yeah, it's gonna be. We're gonna be talking about the epic battle between Donald J. Trump and Joseph. Is it Joseph R. Biden?
Yeah.
Okay. I wonder what it is. Randy? Joseph Randy Biden.
No, I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
All right. Well, tune in next week. Thanks for listening.
Have-
Have a great day.